President Van Rompuy, on behalf of my group, I'd like to thank you for your work towards delivering this agreement. Now, we don't argue that this deal is perfect, far from it. However, we do believe that it represents a sensible and pragmatic balance, a compromise between, on the one hand, contributor countries demanding better spending, and on the other, those who understandably want to protect their net positions. And of course, it should have been easily possible to have significantly reformed the EU budget. I agree with many of the points that have been made today, perhaps towards growth priorities. However, despite the rhetoric from Mr Swoboda and the others, the shining light of the Socialists, President Hollande, showed that his priority was not, in fact, a growth strategy for Europe. His priority was a growth strategy for French cows. And without this intransigence, we could have firstly reduced the cap, we could have made it fairer for newer member states, and we could have directed billions more euros into the competitiveness agenda. Yet President Hollande continues to defend the indefensible, that 40% of the budget is still being spent on farming in the 21st century, which in my view is madness. Now, of course, I'm disappointed, but I have to say not altogether surprised, the teenage tantrums that we've seen from some of the other group leaders today. But we should remember that at the end of the day, it is national governments, not this Parliament, that quite rightly raise the EU's resources. They raise it from hard-working people who are struggling to pay their own tax bills. It is not unreasonable that those people ask the EU to do more with less, as businesses and households are having to do throughout our continent. And what, to my mind, was remarkable about this deal was that leaders from all of the major groups in this House were pushing for a reduction in the budget. David Cameron had many friends, I'm delighted to say, of better spending in the Council. Mr Rutte from the Liberal group, Mrs Merkel, Mr Reinfeldt from the EPP, even Mrs Thorning-Schmidt from the Socialists was in favour of better spending. The Greens, of course, thank goodness, don't have any Prime Ministers, but we should all be grateful for that. Now, let me share with you an email that I received last week. I received, no doubt you do, lots of emails. But this one in particular I thought was interesting. Why they wrote to me, I don't know. But it is from the Young EPP. I didn't know there was a Young EPP, but apparently there is. The board of the Young EPP, now what do they think of this budget? Let me quote to you. The deal struck after long months of negotiations represents a good balance. The European Parliament should vote responsibly in view of budget cuts and austerity measures throughout Europe. EPP members would do well to listen to the very sensible words of their own youth wing. Now, let me address the point made in the FT this morning and by a number of other members today, that this is in fact a deficit budget. My question is simple. It is this. Was every other budget agreed in recent memory where commitments exceeded payments somehow also illegal? Let's forget about this political posturing. Come on, we all know what game you're playing here. I'm turning, interestingly, none of you have mentioned it, but of course President Schulz mentioned it in his speech to the Council, this ridiculous idea of a secret ballot. Frankly, it would make this Parliament a laughingstock. Members of this House must be accountable to our electorate over how we vote on this agreement. This is one of the most important votes that we will take, and we must be able to defend our decision to the very taxpayers who pay the EU bills. So, President, this is not, in fact, a perfect deal. But if this Parliament is to show that it can exercise its new powers with the requisite responsibility, then in my view, we should stand behind it. If this Parliament decides to go to war with the Council, then I think we will all suffer. Thank you, Mr President. Thank you, Mr President.
A minute for Mr Callanan.
Whether I come into the good or bad Europeans category of Mr Van Rompuy's, I'll let my colleagues take a view on that. Let me first of all mention a point that hasn't been raised by virtually anybody else, is that welcome the EU-US negotiations on a free trade agreement. The reality is that even though that's very complicated to do and be difficult in practice, a successful conclusion of that agreement will do more for growth in Europe than any of the relatively small sums that we're arguing about in the budget negotiations today. So I certainly welcome that and hope those negotiations are successful. Now, of course, we all want to see improvements on this budget. Some of us would like to see less spent on agriculture, less spent on admin spending. I'm sure the Commission and this Parliament could do with spending a little bit less. But in essence, there will be negotiations. My guess is that this Parliament will end up voting for this agreement, if only because the alternative of yearly budgets is worse. But I think the one thing that we must not do, because I think it would be completely ridiculous, is to vote against this MFF in secret. If you're going to vote against it, then at least have the courage of your convictions and do it in public. It would open up this Parliament to ridicule across the whole of Europe if we vote in secret on this agreement. Thank you.